About your personal background, that immigration was personal for you, that your family came from Cuba, and before that, I didn't realize about them coming from fleeing Europe during the Nazi regime. How is that impacted you in terms of your policies as the first Latino and the first immigrant to be the Secretary of Homeland Security?
I think, President Garcia, that I understand
His mic's not on.
fragility of life. I understand the fragility of life. I understand.
Use the mic. Use the mic on the podium. I guess you're loud and clear.
I understand the fragility of life. I understand the precariousness of the situation in which too many people find themselves. I understand what an opportunity means, and I keep that uppermost in our mind, in my mind, and in our colleagues' mind when we tackle difficult issues. I remember in the summer of 2014 when we really had our first encounter with a dramatic increase in the number of unaccompanied children who were coming to the border. And I know how close-knit, how important family is in a Latino home. It was everything. It was everything for us. What it must take, what it must take for a parent to send a child alone to traverse another country to reach the border of the United States. What it must mean, what the level of desperation must be to send that child alone. It's something that when we confront the issue of unaccompanied children, when we address their needs, our responsibilities under the law, one has to keep that in mind that this is not policy making in a laboratory. This is people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've seen the debate on immigration, and I've seen political elements in this country that have used fear-mongering, scapegoating, sometimes bordering on just outright racism by certain elements. The brown people are coming. How can we turn that into a positive in how we deal with the debate on immigration reform and get away from that rhetoric that's coming from certain elements on the right?
So I would say two things. One, our voice matters. Our voice matters. As the gentleman said, we have to lift up our voices, and we have to use our own tool of advocacy to push for the reform that is needed. And it is very important to keep in mind that there is unanimity in the view that our immigration system is broken. That is not a subject of disagreement, but what we have to do is come together, and we have to ensure our voices continue to be heard. We have to come together to fix it, and fix it in a way that advances our values, does not compromise them.
So we have a lot of young people in the audience. Some of them are immigrants, some are children of immigrants. How do we explain to them that trying to get immigration reform passed because of the separation of powers, what Congress can do, what the President can do, what you as Secretary of Homeland Security can do? What's doable and practical and what's not, that has to go through Congress?
So, this is a subject of not only debate in the policy context, but frankly, the subject of litigation in the courts. So in 2012, under then President Obama's leadership, we made a decision that we could exercise our administrative authorities as the executive branch and issue really begin a process of deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA, to address that. That use of executive authority has been the subject of litigation for years, and this term, the Supreme Court will make a decision about that program. Over the last number of years, we have not been permitted to actually extend DACA to new applicants, but only to provide renewals of existing DACA recipients. So the line between what is an administrative authority that the executive branch can do as opposed to what Congress must do in passing legislation is a subject of much debate. But immigration reform, when we speak of immigration reform, a pathway to citizenship for the millions of undocumented individuals who've contributed so much to our country, providing permanent relief to DACA recipients, to the dreamers, reforming our system so that it actually matches our economic needs. You know, there are three overarching goals of our immigration system: economic prosperity, family unity, and humanitarian relief, so that we can realize these fundamental change must occur through legislation.
The news has been full of what happened to those 4 Americans across the border in Tamaulipas. And, you know, we've already expressed our condolences to the ones that didn't. But border security and what we're seeing with the cartels, I have a family in Morelos, Mexico, about 50 miles across the border from Eagle Pass, so I go frequently. And we've seen the cartels achieve paramilitary status. They got body armor, they got AR-15s, they got rocket launchers. What are we going to do to control the border security to make sure that those cartels and their quasi-military government agencies, that we protect our Americans here on this side as well as those that travel? Many of those have family in Mexico and we travel for Christmas, Easter days. What can we do to help the Mexican government protect us when we're down there, as well as the U.S. to protect our borders from these type of organizations?
So I would say a few things. Number one, the United States Border Patrol they make up an extraordinary workforce. Individuals who risk their lives every day to secure the border. And I will tell you something. In 2014, since I referenced that, the summer of 2014, I visited the border when the increase in unaccompanied children was occurring, and it was incredible what the Border Patrol agents were doing for those children out of their own pockets. What they were doing in terms of providing much needed supplies for those kids, whether it was blankets, diapers, or whether it was toys. Like, these are parents in their own right. And so I want to commend the Border Patrol. We, in partnership with the Mexican government, are taking it to the cartels and the smuggling organizations. That is not a process that is an overnight endeavor, because indeed these smuggling organizations, these cartels, are indeed incredibly powerful. They exploit people purely for profit. They are inhumane. And so, in fact, we have a delegation leaving today for Mexico, and to not only address the tragedy of what occurred recently, but also to address the fundamental strategy to attack the cartels and the organizations.
Well, LULAC, we've been on the front lines to stop. We see the human smugglers. I've been, when that truck with 52 immigrants died in San Antonio, we got a call that, some of the people were there. So whatever we can do to help
I appreciate
to
that.
stop and prosecute those that are involved in human smuggling, and narcotics struggling because recently in Dallas, 4 teenagers, 12, 13, I think, and 14 died from fentanyl.
Yeah.
It's-
The scourge of fentanyl is extraordinary, and as it was referenced, I was a prosecutor for 12 years, a federal prosecutor. I've prosecuted trafficking cases where there was large amounts of marijuana, by organizations that used firearms and violence, cocaine, methamphetamine, black tar heroin. We haven't seen anything like this with fentanyl, which is purely synthetic. It's highly addictive, and its toxicity, the mortality rate is so extraordinarily high. I will say, in terms of your voices, what we are doing is we are very dedicated to cutting out the smuggling organizations. We see too much death and too much tragedy on the journey through the northern part of Mexico. Our model is to build lawful, safe, and orderly pathways for people to reach the United States, to claim asylum, and to cut out the smuggling organizations. If you could lift up your voices to individuals in their countries of origin, whether it is Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Ecuador, Peru, Dominican Republic, wherever it might be, to take advantage of the pathways that we are providing, and to not place their lives and their life savings in the hands of the smuggling organizations.
I know during COVID, we're not wearing masks today, but 2 years ago, everybody was wearing a mask. And I know that there were no appointments for citizenship. There were a lot of people here, a lot of our members here have people that are in the process. They got an American citizen, spouse, or parent, or somebody, and there was a backlog on the trying to come in here legally. What is the administration and your office doing to try to deal with that backlog of people that are trying to come into this country legally, but are waiting years for that appointment or that interview?
So I think last year, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services might have set a record for the number of individuals naturalized. It was a very high number, certainly higher than any number that I recall during my tenure during the Obama administration as leading that agency. What is important to remember with respect to that agency, which deals with the legal immigration system, is that it was nearly bankrupted during the Trump administration. That agency's financial well-being is dependent upon the fees that people pay for immigration benefits. And by law, every 2 years, a new fee schedule is to be set so that the agency can modify its fees according to an increase in cost or a decrease in cost. And that fee rule of adjusting its cost hadn't occurred for about 7 years. It was on the brink of bankruptcy. Individuals were being furloughed, backlogs mounted, and now, for the first time in those 7+ years, USCIS has issued a proposed a new fee structure to get it financially stable once again. They worked through the economic visa backlog. They exhausted all the economic-based visas last year, so they're really focused on this issue, understanding what it means for people to wait before they can take advantage of their eligibility under the law.
LULAC has been on the border helping with some of the refugees, and we've seen the children, come across. And of course, many of us saw those pictures of when Trump was in office of the cages, in essence, where children sleeping on the floor with I call it the little silver blankets, and that was all. What has your administration done to improve on the humanitarian treatment of these children that are coming across the border now?
So let me say something about those silver blankets and the children on the floor. This is why I said in 2021, when we saw an increase in the number of children in the border patrol stations, the Border Patrol Station is no place for a child. And it is a
$775
holding
a
facility
day.
that is not meant for children. There are no cots, there are no beds, and so children are on the floor. Those silver blankets are Mylar blankets. Why? Because they provide warmth, but a cloth or wool or the like actually breed insects that could actually serve a detriment to the well-being of the children. So it's visually troubling, but it's actually a health safety issue. So what we did, because remember, when a Border Patrol station becomes overcrowded with children, it's actually a product of the fact that the rest of the system is not ready to take them in. And that's why it bottlenecks at the Border Patrol station, because under the law, we are required to move children from a Border Patrol station within 72 hours. Precisely because a Border Patrol station is not a place for a child. So when we
So they
get
die in 3 days?
when we get overcrowded, it's because the system isn't ready to receive them. What we did was we in the Department of Homeland Security dedicated more than 300 people to the Department of Health and Human Services to ensure that it builds the capacity to receive those children in shelters that are more suitable to the care and well-being of children. And so we succeeded in that process.
And have most of the children been, I know that before President Biden took office, I think there was a couple of thousand children that have been reunited with their families or significant others in the United States. Has that backlog been reduced?
Yes, so now the process has really been streamlined. It is the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, that receives the children and then unites them or reunites them with family or sponsors here in the United States. And it is HHS's obligation to ensure the well-being of those children in the custody of family. They have to vet the family or the sponsor to ensure the safety of the child.
A lot of our members are military, former military, and law enforcement. And they take an oath to protect our country from enemies, foreign and domestic. After January 6th, 2022, when we saw the storming of the Capitol, we've seen that we have a lot of domestic enemies that are threatening the use of deadly force, threatening in New Mexico. I believe they just arrested several people for threatening a lot of Latino officials. LULAC, we've had to put security in because we've been threatened. My life has been threatened by elements of the far right that are almost quasi-Gestapo SS mindset. What are we doing to deal with the domestic terrorists that we saw January 6th and that we're seeing, on the border? They're carrying AR-15, saying that they're gonna shoot people who come across the border, as well as those who take the Statue of Liberty for what it means. What are we doing about that?
Well, first of all, to those who have served in the military and served in law enforcement, I want to thank you for your service. When I travel to different countries to meet with my counterparts, ministers, the images of January 6th are always something that they bring up. That here in the United States, the fact that our capital could have been broken into as it was. So the Department of Justice, of course, has brought hundreds of cases arising from that tragic day. When the department was created 20 years ago, we celebrated our 20th anniversary last week. When the department was created 20 years ago, our focus was, of course, on the foreign terrorist, the individual who wanted to come into the United States from abroad and do us grave harm. That threat remains, and we are ever vigilant in addressing it. But what has arisen in prominence in our country, and not exclusive to our country, is what we call the domestic violent extremist. The individual here in the United States who's radicalized to violence because of an ideology of hate, anti-government sentiments, personal grievances, other false narratives spread on social media and other online platforms. And what we are doing is we are seeking to empower and equip communities to address this,
Nothing.
for friends, neighbors, teachers, faith leaders, the community to identify when an individual appears to be descending down a path to radicalized violence and intervene to prevent that from manifesting itself. We have to equip and empower the communities. As a matter of fact, yesterday we issued a notice of funding opportunity for grant programs for communities to build the capacity to address this. We've already distributed, I think, $50 million or so in this all-important effort.
I think it's very important because
So we'll take the military to Mexico, but we won't do shit here.
And I visited with the family of those where an extremist drove basically about 400 miles from Allen, Texas to El Paso to kill Mexicans because he had been inspired by the right-wing rhetoric that he had seen on the internet. And I always thought, could he have been caught earlier to have prevented that tragedy? And how many more are out there like him that have been radicalized? And is the FBI and law enforcement and Homeland Security really focusing to make sure that another El Paso doesn't happen again?
Tremendously focused on this. Director Chris Ray of the FBI and I have spoken publicly about the rise in the prominence of this threat, this terrorism-related threat. It is vitally important here to remember that when one does see somebody exhibiting signs that would suggest they could be descending down a path to violence, to reach out to somebody who can help, a trusted voice, whether it be a mental health counselor, an individual in a position of trust. There's a hesitancy amongst friends and family, understandably, to not bring the accountability regime to bear, to call law enforcement on a son or a daughter, but to call somebody whom one can trust, whom one thinks might be able to provide assistance either directly or know someone who could, because we've seen events occur over the last number of months where the individuals, the assailants, the perpetrators of these crimes have exhibited signs, have communicated in such a way that would put somebody potentially on notice of a problem.
Those are all the questions I have, Mr. Secretary. We really appreciate you spending time here to speak to the new leaders, young people here from throughout the United States. Any parting words you would like to make as we finish up this conversation?
Because of you, thank you very much, President Garcia. Because of you, let me share some backup. Because of my mother's experience, specifically twice being a refugee, I did not do things that my friends would do. I didn't have sleepovers and the like. I didn't go away to camp. My mother's bosses created in her too much of a sense of insecurity to allow that to happen. What my mother drew from that was an understanding that every day is a new life in some way, that something tragic could occur, but something magnificent could occur as well. And therefore, we have an obligation as people, understanding that every day is a new life. We have an obligation, an opportunity and an obligation to make ourselves better today than we were yesterday and better tomorrow than we are today. And I look at this room, I hear the inspiring words of one of your leaders, and I have confidence in the life of our country, the future of our country, that tomorrow we're gonna be better than we are today. And thank you for that, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I also want to give a special thanks to Richard Mesa, he's the one that